It's only been 2 weeks since we've had TFT KO Coliseum release, and yet there's already been 5 patches that have thrown the meta into complete disarray. What are the best comps? How do we play them? And most importantly, how do I climb? Well, you came to the right place. Let's jump into the one-stop shop, the TFT Academy tiers, and find out what's on top and how do we beat the meta. Starting off at the very top, we have the #1 comp in the game when you have the right conditions for it. It's Battle Academia Jayce Caitlyn Reroll. You're going to be playing all 7 Battle Academia minus Katarina, and you're going to be rerolling on level 7 for Jayce 3 and Caitlyn 3, while itemizing any tank, whether it's Leona 2 or maybe even Rakan 3. This composition is mainly S tier when you can get Silvermere Dawn as his primary artifact, or if you have a lot of econ or something like Rig Shop to guarantee that you get a bunch of 3 costs. And that's because this composition is insanely expensive, but even more importantly, Jayce 2, Caitlyn 2 are not particularly that good. When you're playing a bunch of other 3-cost reroll in the past, if you add the 2-star versions of those units, they still actually did a decent amount. This falls off really hard, really fast. So you have to pick the spots where you feel like you either going to have that Silvermere Dawn and you're likely to hit, or you have the econ to make up for it. If you do end up playing no Silvermere Dawn, try to replace it with Titan's Resolve. And the reason why Titan's Resolve is a good alternative is because the item Titans gives you CC immunity. And if you look at Silvermere Dawn, it grants immunities to stuns as well. So if you end up getting something like Silvermere Dawn, try to avoid Titan's Resolve because then you have that overlap of the secondary effect of stun immunity, and it's just inefficient. You could use a bunch of other stats instead. And that actually applies to a lot of different things in the set. So if you have a Supreme Cell, for example, you probably don't want to put something like Gold Collector because partially the effect of it is like an execute, and you're not really getting value off of that. Caitlyn best in slot is Shojin, Infinity Edge, and usually some Damage Amp or Last Whisper. The reason why Last Whisper is really nice is because Caitlyn actually has her bullet bounce around the entire board, so it affects everybody. And that's really important because if you have something like Even Shroud affects an aura in a hex radius, but it won't affect the back line. But Caitlyn, because she shoots the farthest enemy, she ends up hitting that unit, shredding it with Last Whisper and sundering it, and then hitting the rest of the board. And that's also in tandem with Jayce, who, based off his potential, hits the 3 nearest enemies. So what ends up happening is Jayce ends up attacking and hitting and spraying the back line, and that Last Whisper is sundering that target. So TLDR, Last Whisper is a lot more important than Even Shroud. You also might notice we decided to play an all 1 and 7 column split positioning, 1 being here and 7 being here, and this is row A, B, C, D. So we play B7, D7. You can also invert this and play Jayce on B1 and Caitlyn on D1. And the reason why is because Caitlyn shoots a bullet at the farthest enemy, but it only deals that physical damage to the first target hit. So our hope with this is that it splits open that middle and Caitlyn has a clear shot to the enemy corner. A lot of times you're not going to open up playing around Jayce because you just don't have Jayce. You might have Silvermere Dawn and say, oh, I should play like a Jayce opener. Just slam whatever sword item you can, whether it's Bloodthirster or Stairs Gauge. They're both really important. But try to play around a good Silvermere Dawn holder. And Nefiri ends up being really good. But you can also play Garen, Shen, Kabuko, Darius. Just a bunch of different people who would be really good with a bunch of attack damage and also want to carry as well. Sometimes in rare scenarios, though, you will have to try to play around Battle Academia and be a little bit aggressive on your rerolls. But only do that if you really can afford to economically. Once you get to level 7, roll for 7 Battle Academia on 7 and go for Jayce and Caitlyn 3. And then on level 8, you can play Kabuko. You can also play around other Protector as well. If you end up going Rakan 3, you can play Cassante, for example. And then you can see the max cap variation. Cassante and Varus are 2 really nice units to add in so that way you get some sniper bonus for your Caitlyn as well. If you do end up getting a second Silvermere Dawn, that's actually a really good thing for Jayce, so don't ignore that. And then you also can stack some artifacts on Caitlyn, like she's really good with Sniper's Focus, for example. And I also believe that she's also pretty solid with Mana Zane. Some other augments that are worth calling out, I think Transfer Students gives you a lot of high likelihood you're going to hit Rakan 3 on top of Jayce and Caitlyn. And the last thing is that if you do end up getting extra AP items, like a ton of rods and a ton of tiers and things like that, don't feel afraid to itemize Yuumi, but make sure you have these 3 things taken care of first before you start giving Yuumi items. Composition number 2 is 7 Crystal Gambit, aka Crystal Gamba. This is a trait that you only really play if you have the Crystal Gambit emblem, because you can't hit 7 without it. There's only 6 Crystal Gambit units. And it is made through a spat and a belt. So anytime you get Crystal Gambit emblem, it is definitely worth considering whether or not you can actually go for it. And try to get the 7 Crystal Gambit. But the way to actually convert it is not like a full loss streak. I think in the past, people have this impression that it's a lose streak mechanic. So you try to build up to like one insane cash out. But in reality, late game, this is actually something you want to play for win streak, because it really matters how many units that you can kill once you get 5 and 7 Crystal Gambit active. So unlike the other lose streak mechanics where you cash out and you either stay in the tree or you transition to something else, you're going to always want to stay in Crystal Gambit and then try to win as many fights as you can, because the more kills that you get, the more cash outs you're going to be able to also get. And there's some really powerful stuff. You can get a bunch of emblems, you can get a bunch of items, a bunch of different units, even artifacts and things like that. It's just kind of insane after a while. The best holder of the Crystal Gambit emblem is just more frontline, because you're trying to play around Ashe, and Ashe really wants Rageblade and Kraken plus 1 extra item. Usually you want another bow-based item for Ashe for her 3rd item, so Rageblade, Kraken, and sometimes a 2nd Rageblade or a Kraken number 2, but you can't actually get that very often, so we just have Gunblade here just for pragmatic reasons, but you could also go for any of those, like 2nd Rageblade, 2nd Kraken. Braum is really good because, 1, it gives you life. Braum's passive is called the Champ, and every win that you get gives you 2 effective HP. So it's really nice, and it ties in with Swain the Bastion. But if you don't have Braum, you can always also play unit like Udyr temporarily in order to get like Juggernaut with Vi and then the Duelist in the moment. Zyra just holds any other AP items, and the powers that we recommend here are Bullet Hell to get more projectiles with Ashe, or just anything that just does more damage for her. I actually really like Attack Expert. I think this is really underrated. It just ramps up the Kraken really, really fast. And then for secondary one, we recommend Frontline here just to make sure that you're not getting too greedy, but you could end up also going for Zyra for your power snack as well if you feel like your frontline is good enough. Sometimes you're just going to cash out an excess amount of frontline and you need to put something on your backline for more DPS. Ashe is also particularly really good with Flicker Blades and Fish Bones, so keep an eye out for that. And then other ways that you can cap your board, Lee Sin and Gwen, just itemize them, and you could play Lee Sin either as a Juggernaut, or you can have Gwen just hold extra AP items. Augments are pretty straightforward. Just pick anything that helps you stay alive and also reach your board state, because once you hit 7 Crystal Gambit, you just need to keep killing things and surviving until you can cash out more and more. The third comp that we have in S tier is Volibear Edgelords. Volibear is really powerful this patch. They buffed him a lot, and now if he can snowball the fight, he just becomes kind of unstoppable, especially if you're able to get an Edgelord emblem and get 6 Edgelords. He is really, really strong. The trick to Volibear is to make sure to position with a gap in the front line and try to force him to change targets. And this is because the passive is for Volibear is that whenever he changes targets, he slams a big AoE to deal a bunch of extra bonus damage. So you try to start off at the beginning of the fight by baiting Volibear to walk up, but then Yasuo, in this example, takes that slot, so Volibear has to move to the left, and by changing targets, he'll jump on that target instead. This is very reminiscent of back a year ago in set 12 Magic and Mayhem, where Olaf would actually change targets and deal a bunch of cleave damage. It's very, very similar. And that's why Samira's on the left side, so that way Volibear and Samira can work on the left side here alongside Braum, and then try to work its way to the back line. As you play this composition, you're going to realize there's more and more positioning tricks that you can do. Like one thing, for example, is that we have Gnar in the top front line, which actually blocks the front line itself and manipulates Volibear even more. And also because he's an edgelord, he's going to dash to safety and then do a little bit of a stun. So there's a lot of reasons to like Gnar being put in the front. But you can also manipulate this through range units and have Volibear even jump further than just here on the edges. You can have him jump on the far sides and maybe even jump to enemy backline. And the way you do that is to force him into certain spots using range units. If you have Gnar, for example, here in the second row, and then Samira blocking it off, and then clog all of Volibear's pathways to the front, you might force him to jump really far. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just basically try it and force Volibear into awkward spots and just observe the patterns of which he jumps around, because it's a really big deal. The other thing about this composition is that it just needs so many swords and gloves. Best in slot Volibear is Infinity Edge, Striker's Flail, and then the data says Deathblade, but that in itself is 3 swords. And then you look at Samira and you need Infinity Edge and Spear of Shojin, which is a lot of swords, which is why things like Sword Overflow and, you know, Component Buffet, Pandora's items could be really powerful for this composition. So that way you can get those items. But if you can't get things like, you know, a Deathblade on Volibear, you can also go Stairs Gauge, Edge of Night, Kraken's Fury. These are all perfectly acceptable alternative builds. So that way you can get Volibear dealing a lot of damage. It kind of doesn't matter that much what the third item is, but if you really want to greed because you can choose, you probably want that Deathblade. If you don't have an Edgelord emblem, you're always going to play 4 Luchador plus 4 Edgelord, but sometimes you're just not going to hit the Braum, but you might pick up something like Yone. In that the case, on level 8, you don't play Braum and you don't play Gnar and you play Yone and you play Xayah instead for a 6 Edgelord 2 Luchador comp. That's one alternative you can do. You can also just play another Luchador unit. Sometimes it's fine to just play like another Volibear, so that way you get, you know, another Luchador on the board, and then you might get like extra Volibears to just deal more damage. In fact, on level 9, sometimes you see 2 Volibear 2s just being played if you're the only person playing in the lobby. In terms of powers, the best power that people have agreed upon is Serious Slam on Volibear, and that's just because it has really good synergy with his passive that jumps around and deals a bunch of damage. But you could also pick some other ones to just help him either survivability or damage. I kind of like Unflinching because that just means that he won't get chain CC'd at the very beginning of the fight. And there are a lot of like mini stuns right now in the set that can really be very annoying to deal with. In this composition, you generally want to power up your second carry because you're pretty much just trying to rush them down. And so you oftentimes just put it on Samira. And Samira has a handful of ones that are really good. She's actually quite versatile. She can either just primary carry with something like Precision or Shadow Clone. These are 2 really powerful damage ones. But you can also give her utility like Sky Piercer, which ends up being really, really nice because sometimes you end up being limited on items because you're prioritizing Volibear and Samira items, so you don't have enough for like frontline. So just having utility built into your power up can be really, really good. The best opener that you can probably play around this is Soul Fighters because it's just really easy to play around it through like the AD opener, and you can even have this potentially bridge into other Infinity Edge and Guard Breaker setups that are in the current meta. So I probably would recommend playing that as an early game. All right, it's time to talk about Akali, everyone's favorite assassin from Set 10 Remix Rumble. She's back. She is an Executioner Supreme Cells, which means that she has a built-in Execute and Damage Amp. And now people are building her with Archangel's Rageblade for a ton of scaling and cheesing backlines while also being unkillable if you're able to get Crimson Veil as the power-up to stall for all of her scaling. Rageblade on Akali is not really intuitive, but in case you missed it, Rageblade no longer stacks with every attack. It just gives you stacking attack speed every second. And then the second thing to keep in mind is that Akali is an assassin, and she does not actually get mana while being attacked. And so instead, what we try to do with Akali is ramp up this attack speed so that way she can spam cast by the second half of the fight. And you combine that with Shojin. So that way Akali, when she is casting and it's just hard to like lock her down, she ends up healing a ton, being very defensive with the Omnivamp shield, and then also scaling a bunch of ability power. So it's just really obnoxious to deal with. And the hard thing about Akali is that she's always going to dash at the back line. So if you're playing like a solo backline carry, like Juggernauts Ashe that we'll talk about in a little bit, but if you have like Ashe here, Akali is just going to snipe that Ashe and mark it, and it's just very, very difficult to deal with. A lot of people are going to be playing this composition, and it's pretty straightforward to get to. So a lot of people are going to be spamming it whenever they have anything like a Rageblade opener with Shojin. They're going to be thinking about Akali. The best core to play around Akali is 6 Protector because it just plays best to the win condition, which is stalling. Again, you want every fight to drag out as long as possible. So 6 Protectors provide a lot of shield. Also, it just buffs your whole team. They get durability while shielded. Guess what? Crimson Veil ends up giving her the shield, right? So you get extra durability as well. So it all kind of feeds really, really nicely together with 6 Protector. But you also don't have to play 6 Protector. You can also just play some interchangeable amount of Protectors, like maybe 2 and 4, tech in more Supreme Cells if you're not able to hit Cassante, and then work in Strategist and other things as well. It's actually pretty flexible, but it's just 6 Protectors is very cheap and easy to play because you're playing a couple 1 costs and 2 costs. It's just very easy and convenient without having to be too expensive. A lot of times early game, you're going to play around Janna as your early game carry and play around 4 protectors. Janna's pretty good, specifically with double ramp, and this actually applies to her reroll composition, or if you play her as a secondary carry and crew. Janna's really, really good with archangels, and then you want the Rage Blade just to give her the ability to cast a lot. The thing is, this composition is really contested, so we recommend things like reinforcement or other econ augments, just so that way you can hit that Akali. But rest assured, you also do want combat augments, so things like, say, a Spellweaver, Blazing Soul ends up having a lot of synergy with just the fact that your composition stalls. You also can play like an all-out Cassante variation of this, which is a composition that actually got nerfed and is in C. We're actually not going to talk much about the C tier at all this video, because those are just comps that we don't really recommend you to play. But if you do, this is kind of the variation that you would play with Cassante, but you're only supposed to do this if you get sort of an excess amount of swords and gloves. Like, the one way you can kind of angle into this is you're playing into Volibear with Edgelords, and you have like Infinity Edge and Striker's Flail. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you just get hit with like Rod, tier, and you can figure like, oh, maybe I'll just play Akali. You hit an early Cassante, you use the power snack on it, and you get all out. Okay, snap, I'm all the way in Akali and Cassante. Now, that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I literally played that game earlier today, and I got like a solid third with it. And I have to say that that is probably the most powerful way that you can flex around the possibility of playing Cassante, Akali, and either the protectors or leaning a little bit more into sort of that strategist flex. Akali is also really good with Dawn Core and Mana Zane and Zhonya's, as well as Wits End. She has a really good wide array of artifacts that she can use, so make sure to look that up if you want to get all that maximum efficiency. Last but not least, generally always play Akali in A3 or A5 because she is going to hit the corners that way. At A3, she's going to hit the 1 and 5 hex. At A5, she's going to hit the 3 and 7 hex on the back row. If you position her in the top center, she has a risk of dashing to the far left if they play units in the front line. So yeah, she could hit like some of these other units that are in the middle because people are going to anti-Akali position. But there's also the possibility that she just dashes to the side. There's actually like a ton of nuance into Akali positioning. So I'm actually going to create a guide about not only how to play Akali, but also how to position against Akali. And so that's going to be coming on another YouTube video that I make, whether it's for this channel or for one of my other ones. The quickest tip that I can give that will have immediate impact in your next game against Akali is to leave the A5 and A6 gap open. This is because Akali will be forced to walk either to this hole on the left or this hole on the right. And either way, she is going to not be the farthest target from Gnar and will dash over to the left side. And when she's dashed over here, she's just going to dash back and forth and avoid the Gnar. And that's doubly so if you have extra bait. So in the case, for example, if you're playing like Juggernauts Ashe and you somehow find a Zyra, for example, the Zyra comes with the Grasping Root, so you can bait and have Akali dash like here to the left side and then dash over to this Grasping Root and then dash back to the top right. You know what I mean? So she'll just like dash everywhere and not actually hit this Ashe. And you actually can finally kill the tank and focus fire her down. So that's like one way you can position around Akali as a quick tip. Kayle Reroll is probably the strongest 2-cost reroll currently, and that's because, well, Kayle in general is quite strong, specifically with some powers like over 9,000 is insane on her. I think Bullet Hell is really, really good. I played a hat trick game where I was able to rack up a lot of hats, and it felt really solid as well. And you have to remember that she also scales permanent AD as well with each kill. So you actually do want to play this when you have that early Kayle. Try not to like play into Kayle if you feel like you have good items for her, but you have no copies of it, and then you're gonna like roll down in stage 3 for, you know, Kayle 2. That is probably just too late, and so you do want to play Kayle in that situation as an intermediary carry. Like, you want her to just transition to something else. She can hold like, you know, Volibear and Samira items perfectly, but if you don't get like, you know, the powerful Kayle set up, don't reroll her, just push levels instead. The thing that makes Kayle really pop are some artifacts. I think Kayle with Fishbones is insanity because she has a really high chance of sniping backline when she casts, and that is really strong with her execution with Supreme Cells and also just scaling her passive. She can just like snipe backline. She also can use things like Mana Zane and Sniper's Focus. Heaven forbid that you have multiple of this. I've gone up against Fishbones and Mana Zane, like Kayle having both of them multiple times, and it is just a nightmare to deal with. Kai'Sa also wants to be same side as the enemy carry because she fires missiles divided by nearest enemies. And so once she kills the front line, she actually starts targeting the enemy back line. So she's really, really nasty about that. If you can't hit Mundo 2 as a tank, look for Udyr 3. I've also tanked Aatrox 3 before in pin situations, but just get any kind of front line. It doesn't really matter what. And make sure you cap your board with Juggernaut Lee Sin. You can give him items as well. And then if you need more backline presence because Kai'Sa is getting sniped by things like Akali, you just play Zyra and add a little bit more backline. Karma Sorcerers were a terror in the very first patch, and we didn't do like a full rundown of it on the tier list, but this composition was one of the 2 best comps in the game alongside Gangplank previously. It got nerfed pretty heavily, but it still is quite solid. It's just much more of a stable, level 8 comp that you try to see if you can hit Gwen on. And it is pretty strong if you get to 9 and play around Braum 2, Gwen 2. And you don't even have to necessarily play Ryze. Ryze is just nice because the mentor bonus allows Karma to cast even quicker, but you can also play Cassante. The first thing I want to point out is that a lot of people think, oh, is this actually a mistake? You have Ryze in the front line. No, Ryze actually is a frontline unit in this composition because if you don't, let's count how many frontline units we have otherwise. 1, 2, 3. And that is a pretty severe imbalance to try and hold off a bunch of, compositions that can burst past your front line. You're talking about like Volibear, for example. Volibear just comes in, just jumps on your mech, kills it instantly, and starts working around to your back line. That is a really bad time. So the Ryze is basically just 1,000 HP that you get in the way between you and Karma. And the reason why it works is because Karma and Sorcerers are also a fast burst composition. You get 80 AP or 90 AP, I think now. And then when that enemy dies, they explode and deal more damage to nearby enemies. And so you're just trying to like basically glass cannon, kill them before they kill you. And so for that reason, this is also a composition where if you don't have, Void Staff or Morello, these are 2 of Gwen's best items because she hits the whole board. So Void Staff is really good to shred the whole board. Morello and Red Buff are really good to hit the whole board. This is also a composition where Sunfire is actually quite good because of how fast the fights are, because you just want to end things by having Karma annihilate the front line and have her Discus work her way around the board as well. Best in slot Karma is Shojin, JG, and Flail. And the thing about Karma is you just really want any of, I think these 3 of the power snacks. I think Efficient is her best one, but Shadow Clone and Mage are also pretty comparable. I think there's actually people who think Shadow Clone is better than Efficient, but I think Efficient is particularly really good when you have Ryzen, because I believe it should be 4 autos for the actual destruction disc to come out, because you get extra mana from the attack and a little bit of mana gen from the Spear of Shojin. I think it times perfectly. For Gwen, you really want things like Fusion Dance, Needlework, and potentially Stormbender, but those are just like pretty good power snacks. Just any damage for Gwen is good. Before you get to Gwen, though, you're probably going to want to put the power snacks on either Swain or Jarvan, whoever you're able to get it on. But the reality is you're pretty much going to always have to put the second snack on frontline until you hit Gwen, so it doesn't really matter who as long as you have it on them. Don't forget that Gwen is insane with range extension, super powerful if you do. And if you do end up getting something like Fishbones or Sniper's Focus, whatever, you can go for like straight up damage. So Sniper's Focus plus Death Cap plus JG, or you can even still put the Morello, but you don't really need the Edge of Night anymore once you have that. And then the best artifact for this composition is Mana Zane on Karma. It is insane, so definitely play that if you get a spot for it. Soul Fighter does pretty solidly in the data, but this composition is a little bit on the rare side to play, and I'm not entirely sure when you should be playing it. I've had okay success playing it this patch. I played it, I think, a few times, and I've gotten like 3rd and 4th. But it seems to be a composition you mainly play for when you have like a good Soul Fighter augment, like anything that just says, play Soul Fighters, tournament favorites, Soul Surge. If you get a Soul Fighter crest is really good. And then also you could like play a halfway point between this and Volibear. I personally believe that Volibear and Edgelords is just the better version of Soul Fighters. But sometimes, Soul Fighters, you roll down, you don't hit Volibear, and you hit Samira too, and then you somehow like spike a Gwen, you can just like lean into that a lot more. And the nice thing too is that you kind of can break up the items, right? Like if you have Edge of Night, Striker's Flail, and Infinity Edge, and then you hit Gwen, you can just spread it out and split it accordingly, then put items on Samira instead. And the reason why I think it works better is because I do think that this board is ultimately cheaper than the Edgelord board that just requires like a bunch of, things like Volibear, Set, and Samira. It can just kind of get pricey after a while. But yeah, overall, this is just another variation you can play around Samira Volibear. And I do believe you can actually move down from 8 to 6 Soul Fighter if you have a really good reason to do so, because you just play a bunch of 5 costs. Like let's say he hit Braum, for example. You could play Braum Volibear and play 6 Edgelord, or 6 Soul Fighter rather, plus the Edgelords. And you can tie in, say, a Shen in that response. Or if you hit like a Zyra 2 Twist of Fate, you can just like put Soul Fighter on them and flex around it as such. So it's just generically good. So I think that Soul Fighter still a really solid vertical, but it's not something that's going to be played very often. Juggernauts Ashe is also kind of a situational vertical. The times that I tried to play around this is mainly if you just have like perfect Ashe items and you have like a lot of economy to be able to get there. Ashe just basically requires a bunch of bows, like Ginsu's Rageblade, Kraken, and just like multiple of them. Like I think Ashe actually is better with 2 Rageblades and Kraken, so maybe we swap this ult builds. But you also can go double Kraken, or you can go for just an AD item like Deathblade or Gunblade or Giant Slayer or whatever. One thing to do though is do not build Infinity Edge on Ashe, because these gates of Avarosa, these attacks actually can already crit. So if you actually build Infinity Edge, the entire point of it is that abilities can critically strike. And if she already critically strikes anyways, then why would you even want to put Infinity Edge on her, right? So those are like a couple of baits for this composition that you have to be really careful about. Ashe is also really good with Flicker Blade and Fishbones, so make sure that if you have these artifacts that you can try to play for it. They both give like a bunch of attack speed and some damage, so you just pretty much have it replace, I guess, like the third item. You would go Fishbones, Rageblade, Kraken, or Flicker Blades, Rageblade, Kraken, basically. Just play Rageblade and Kraken plus a third item. Like that's pretty much the moral of the story here. You always play 6 Juggernauts. Take the Juggernaut emblem early so you can get early tempo. Play around Gnar. Gnar is like the best opener with this alongside Mundo. And then just get to 8. And then the nice thing too is with this Zyra, you can actually cap pretty decently high by getting some Crystal Gambit resources just for fun. And then the Zyra is also really nice to bait for the Akali, as we talked about. Make sure you have all that sorted. The legendary version of Juggernauts Ashe is to play around Twisted Fate. So this is like basically the 5-cost flex version of Ashe. If you're playing Juggernauts Ashe, you can play like into Twisted Fate as your late game option if you need a cap higher, because you're like, oh, I have Ashe, but I feel like I'm getting out capped. This is like your ultimate late game board. And you play around Lee Sin and Braum and Zyra all holding items. But, if you're able to get to a spot where you're playing this Fast 9 board, pretty much should be able to just kind of transition. This is basically an example board of what happens if you are like teleport to level 9, you have 150 gold. You're like, I have no idea how to outcap some of these like reroll comps, or you're going against Kai'Sa at 3 and you're like, okay, Ashe is not good enough. What do I do? This is what you do. Twisted Fate basically uses Ashe items perfectly. We have Morello on him because all his cards can hit it, but you can put Morello totally fine on Zyra instead. If you don't have Last Whisper, you have Even Shroud. That's totally fine as well. And you can go Rageblade Kraken on Twisted Fate. A-okay. A couple of other pieces of tech. I'm pretty sure Lee Sin is really good with Silvermere Dawn if you're able to get it on him. The reason why we had this Juggernaut emblem is just to show that you make Lee Sin as a Juggernaut. For some reason, in a lot of team builders, including the one in the TFT client, when you click Lee Sin, he has no trait because he's a stance master. So this is just to demonstrate it. This Silvermere Dawn we played on Lee Sin as a third item. But yeah, other than that, this is pretty much not really a comp that you ever angle for unless you are on Scuttle Puddle or Gold Subscription and you just hit like an obscene amount of gold, because otherwise it's just a late game transition off of Juggernauts Ashe. Cat reroll is also still a thing, but because of the popularity of Jayce and Caitlyn, it's become a little bit hard to hit Battle Academia. Not to mention that, you might just run into some Yuumi players. And Katarina 3, we should actually have her 3-starred in this build, so remind me to change that. Katarina is really dependent on Yuumi as a dual carry because Katarina doesn't really rely on Jayce and Caitlyn in this build. You want to stack the AP instead because Yuumi can provide shred for the Katarina. So it's kind of hard to actually get all of that going. But if you do have the condition for Katarina, she is quite good. My favorite setup for her right now is either over 9,000 or something that also gives her like scaling, like not done yet. You could also do weights. Theoretically, it's really good because you give her a bunch of attack speed to spam cast, which is really powerful. Katarina's also really good with Zhonya's instead of Edge of Night, and I believe we don't have this up yet, but we'll probably add it later. But she's also really good with Dawn Core, and that gets her to spam cast a lot and stay alive a lot as well. And because you are trying to play in Assassin build, we call it Assassination Classroom as a good reference, you actually want to put the other power-up on Yuumi, not Leona late game, because you're just trying to end fights pretty quickly. Like this, the job of Leona isn't to stall very long. It's just long enough for Katarina to get to the back line. Again, we position like this, like where we have the 1-7 columns positioning, because you want to pull their frontliner away from Katarina, ideally. If your enemy tank is here, this positioning will likely pull the tank away, which allows Katarina and Leona to like basically TP and walk up and kill the enemy backline and do like a giant AoE. So like that's like the kind of positioning that you're hoping to get. There is a couple of manipulation tricks that you can do with Jayce. If you put Jayce here instead, then because he's a fighter, he actually doesn't get aggroed upon because tanks are often going to be taking the aggro. And so if they had the enemy tank here and it's 50-50, if Jayce is over here, the tank will always go towards Leona. And you can use that to manipulate for your benefit, depending on, you know, how 5-head and 200 IQ you are as a player. So just keep that in mind. And that is kind of important because Katarina, if you're stuck on the tank, if she's just basically blinking over and over to the tank, it just ends up becoming quite a hard fight because Katarina needs to get to the back line. For this composition, you're going to want to roll on 6, but some people choose to level to 7 and roll for Katarina 3 as well, because you want to play 7 Battle Academia. The Executioner does matter, by the way. We play Rise because it's just the easiest to get like the mentor bonus, but you can also play an Akali version of this. That's right, you can play Akali with Katarina as well, although you don't have Supreme Cell, so it's not as good. You can also play Lee Sin as an Executioner as well. So you can just throw in any Executioner you want, 7 BA plus Executioner, very easy thing to do. Going into the B tier comps aren't bad at all. It's just that they are harder to pull off and they just struggle with a little bit of consistency issues for multiple reasons. But they can be really good if you play them from the right spots. Battle Academia Prodigy, aka Yuumi, is still a really solid AP composition that I think everyone needs to keep in the repertoire. This is a composition that you really play when you have a good Center 2 opener and you can play around things like Rising Chaos, or you just have like upgraded Garen Rell and you just really have good items for Battle Academia. The nice thing about this opener is that you can actually play this or Sorcerers with Karma, and they actually use pretty similar items at the beginning because you can go for a Jewel Gauntlet and a Striker's Flail, and then depending on if whether or not you get something like Shojin or you get more tiers and you can't get like, you know, tier and Shojin or blue buff at all, then you can just play Prodigy. If you're playing Prodigy, because you have so much mana generation, you actually don't really go for mana gen items. Instead, you go for like Hextech Gunblade, or you go for Archangels or things like that, and you get like a ton of value off of the fact that you get a bunch of mana, and then Yuumi just scales like crazy. Yuumi just outscales pretty much everything, even Akali, with all those like scaling items, because she just does true damage, and it just ends up being quite a force to be reckoned with the longer the fight goes. You're going to almost always play 5 Battle Academia and 5 Prodigy, but it's kind of hard to fit 5 Prodigy at 8 unless you get a Prodigy emblem or a Battle Academia emblem. You have to give up something. And you don't want to give up Cassante, because Cassante is really important to make sure that Malzahar can provide duo carry damage that's really valuable. Malzahar is really good with the utility stuff, so if you get Void Staff, Red Buff, Morello, things like that, give it to Malzahar because he spreads it. If you do get Malzahar 3, though, there is merit to like swapping him and Yuumi and having Yuumi be support and Malzahar 3 being the primary carry. We have something like this Adaptive Helm as a mana gen example on Malzahar, only because, well, sometimes you're just going to get tiers and you don't really have anything to do with it in this composition as much, but also because Malzahar wants to spread it out as fast as he can. So, you know, Adaptive Helm ends up being kind of nice so that way you can tag everything on the opponent's board. The thing to note about this composition is that you don't really want to play from behind, because if you are behind, chances are you're going to be rolling really aggressively to save loss on 8, and it's hard to get to 9. And if you can't get to 9, you can't get 5 Prodigy, which doesn't activate its secondary effect, which is healing an ally for 12% of the damage dealt. It's like attaching a Gunblade to, or half a Gunblade rather, to all of your Prodigies, And that's a really powerful impact, especially with a scaling Yuumi. So just keep that in mind. And as you kind of proceed with Prodigy, you just basically want to play from like a good, strong AP tempo opener. You want to roll down for Yuumi and either K'Sante 2 or Leona 2. The powers that we have recommended here are for Bullet Hell on Yuumi. That is her best one by far, but I think we don't have it listed here, but I think Super Genius is also pretty underrated. It's kind of like an Archangel's effect for Yuumi. I think is quite good. And then Leona can just take any tank one, but I also personally prefer putting items on K'Sante as well, because I think K'Sante 2 is great at tanking and also can pretty much use exactly the same kind of power snacks. Crew reroll is quite good if you're able to get to like a strong combat or heavy reroll augment start. I think a lot of people look at Treasure Hunt as being one of like the premier augments to play crew, but you can also play some reroll stuff like Hefty Rolls, which is really good, Prismatic Ticket, Pandora's Bench, anything that just encourages you to play a bunch of one costs and a benefit from that. I'd also say that crew is largely defined by Malphite openers and not Sivir. If I have a lot of Malphites, that makes me much more likely to play crew than Sivir, because Malphite is the only tank of the composition for a really long time until you get Shen 3, because Shen 2 is just not serviceable for quite a long time. And so you really want defensive items and a lot of copies of Malphite, in my opinion, in order to get to a good crew spot. Another bait of this composition is that I don't think you really want like scaling HP on Malphite, because it just takes too long for it to have high impact. You really want to actually like be strong once stage 3 comes around, because you need as much time as you can stall to get to things like Shen 3 and Ziggs 3. So try to pick just like actual power-ups instead of scaling HP ones that will kick in like stage 5, stage 6 for Malphite. Also, this build is like the basic version of it, but I'm pretty sure as we get better at this set, I think you're not actually supposed to like prioritize Sivir items. Instead, you play around something like Janna 3 carry, but that is probably going to be a variation that we update once we get a little bit more reps on it, because it's kind of hard to itemize both Ziggs and Janna, but I think that is the strongest way to play crew, because I think Janna 3 with those AP items like Rageblade and Archangels is very, very good. Mundo Jhin reroll is really hard to pull off, mainly because Mundo and Juggernauts are just so contested this patch. Very, very contested. I tried to play this twice, and my scores were like 8 and 6 because I just couldn't even get to Mundo 3. And I had things like Heroic Grab Bag, and I was just stuck on like 5 Mundos, not even close. So it's just really, really hard to get to. If you do find yourself in an uncontested situation and like an early Mundo Jhin, specifically those 2 units with items, it can still be pretty solid and get you like a really easy 2nd and 3rd place, like very, very guaranteed. It does have trouble winning out, but that's not the problem. The problem is that Juggernauts are so contested. They are the preferred frontline for a lot of compositions that you'll see up here. And not only that, a lot of people will open with Dr. Mundo. Like, they're not even necessarily trying to play like a Juggernaut frontline. It's just that Mundo is just such a good 2 cost that people will play it and hold those units for a really long time, and you're just not going to be able to hit things like the Jhin 3, Mundo 3. So it is good if you can get there, but it's just really unlikely that you're going to be able to get there uncontested. The power snacks that you care about is Artistic KO for Jhin, and then some good tank one for Mundo. I do have to warn you, Unstoppable Mundo, in combination with his Luchador, sometimes abandons your entire backline. Like, Mundo will dash all the way here with like Unstoppable, and then once he Luchador activates, he like jumps like here or something like that, and then all of a sudden the units just like walk up here and kill your Jhin. And I've had that happen like many times. So just be mindful that Unstoppable is really, really good, but also, yeah, it's kind of a troll power up sometimes. Star Guardians is just pretty situational. It feels like something you only play if you ever have like a Star Guardian emblem, and like you just have to play into that line. Because I think that the vertical with the emblem is quite solid. Like, you know, Jinx is pretty uncontested. Poppy is pretty uncontested. So you should be able to hit it pretty easily. I find myself playing this the most when I get Star Guardian off of like a Trainer Golems, a Wandering Trainer, or Hard Commit, branching out, right? These augments that like force you to have a Star Guardian, you have to play around it. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think this is one of the only compositions where Seraphine can shine. Seraphine is pretty terrible outside of that. Even in 5 Prodigy, where you play around Yuumi, I just think Seraphine's not even worth itemizing. But in Star Guardians, I actually think she is. So definitely worth thinking about. In this power-up situation, we're actually showing Ahri because a lot of times you can go for Ahri 3 and Poppy, but a lot of times you actually can also power up Jinx and Poppy as well. And if you do, one power-up that I really like on Jinx is Sky Piercer, so that way you can get both Sunder and Shred and not have to worry about it, because I think Star Guardians is really awkward around utility. Another really awkward thing about Star Guardians is that they don't actually have a good applier of Morello or red buff. What I mean by that is just think about like how everything targets. Jinx autos a lot, and then finally when she cash, she'll do an AoE in a hex radius, but she wants to be positioned on the side. So when she AoEs, she's only going to AoE like this section, and this is the section that gets anti-heal, right? The burn here. And that is not good enough for a late game. Then you have Ahri, who is a single target. Xayah, who, I mean, she only targets 2 enemies. Syndra, who's single target. Seraphine, who basically takes an entire Dragon Ball Z episode to cast 1 ability. So it's like, it's just kind of hard to actually get anti-heal through Morello and red buff. And so a lot of times you actually prefer Sunfire or Inner Fire, or you go for like Sunfire board, right? Like something that just helps you get that, because you really do need anti-heal to play the game. I actually would highly recommend against like not building Sunfire or Morello or red buff, because there's so many ways that tanks can go infinite this set. Vertical Mech is not really a thing right now. This is basically what happens if you roll for Karma and somehow hit Yone and have some mech related augments. But for the most part, if you have this setup, I pretty much would always prefer to play Sorcs. You could also play this temporarily until you hit Sorcerers, but the stats on it are pretty mediocre, so I would just avoid this for now. In fact, I'm actually tempted to demote this to C tier alongside dishsoap, because I just think it's not that impactful. But I do anticipate eventually Mech to be good. So it's bad right now, or rather it's mediocre right now, but keep an eye out for this for the next patch. Kayle Reroll is pretty much just played only on extremely high resource portals like Scuttlepuddle, Crabrave, and Gold Subscription, because the catch-22 about Kayle is that the more gold you roll to get Kayle 3, the less chance you have to get to 9, and that is sort of a conundrum, because how else are you going to get Kayle 3 unless you get like Worth the Wait or Build the Bud? And those are probably the situation that you play Kayle. So this composition isn't like in the situational X tier, but it feels like it is. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I don't think Kayle is very, very commonly played outside of that. But if you do get to level 9 and you're able to get the Juggernaut frontline, yet another composition, by the way, that plays around Juggernaut frontline, it is really good. Kayle's win rate as a 1 cost is really high if you can get to the end game state. Another thing too about Kayle is that she actually doesn't really want like the final form or the final ascent power-ups that like if you reach level 10, you're going to have like this insane power spike, because it's just like kind of impractical to get there. But I will say that over 9,000 is really good scaling on her. And I also like another one that we don't have listed, which is Hero's Arc, I believe. The one you get damage amp per level that you are. That one's also pretty solid. I think those are like really underrated power-ups to get on Kayle. And the reason why we don't have a list is because, I mean, there's more than 4 good power-ups. So those are just, you know, one of the suggestions that I would give on top of what we see here. Monster Trainer has a couple variations. Right now, you can play Smolder with Protectors or Juggernauts, and you can also play Kog'Maw with Juggernauts or Protectors. Those are like pretty common variations to play around it. I would say that overall, Smolder just requires you to have like the Smolder early with basically perfect items. And Smolder doesn't really do anything until level 30, which is kind of like really problematic, since there is like 3 stages between when you get Smolder and when you hit Smolder 3 and level 30. So he's just kind of useless for a really long time. That's his main downside, but he is good once you get him going. And Smolder is particularly really good with over 9,000. And then the other thing about Kog'Maw is that he is really good with a bunch of artifacts, Flicker Blades, Static Shiv, Lichbane, Dawn Core, like really good with it. But Kog'Maw is not really playable outside of it. So try not to play Kog'Maw if you don't have any of these artifacts. Last but not least, this is like another variation of playing Fast 9 around Varus. I would probably say that this is the spot you play for if you are trying to play like all out Cassante, Volibear, and you just like miss so hard. You're just rolling on 8 and you hit Varus pair and you're like, oh, I have this like duplicator. I'm not hitting Volibear. Oh, I'll just pivot to Varus instead, right? Like sometimes that happens. So if you're able to get to level 9 and play this like level 9 5-cost Varus board, it's quite good. But it's going to be very rare that you ever try to pull this off unless you have Infinity Gold and kind of specific items. But, you know, that's why we put these like Fast 9 comps at the end of the tier, because it's like, it's just so situational. If you can get there, it's good. But, I mean, it's not really going to be something you play more than like twice a patch unless you're like actively looking for it, or somehow you just keep hitting like, you know, hedge fund and upper mobility and level up and those kinds of augments. If a composition's in C tier, just avoid it. I mean, the composition that I would recommend if you do play anything would be All Out Cassante, but it is so specific. So try not to play it if you can. I think they are in C tier for a reason. It's just that, you know, some people want to play bad comps and C tier comps, or they're just dropped into the 1 in 50 games where they have to play Gangplank Reroll. I played it. I somehow squeezed together a 4th with the perfect opener. I literally had these 3 items and Gangplank 2 at 2-1, and I barely got a 4th, but like, you know, you can definitely still pull it off. Unfortunately, I think they over-nerfed this comp. They're definitely going to improve it over time. That also plays the Duelist and a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, try to avoid C tier for now. Let's cover the situational tier and just talk about, I think, the select ones that matter the most. The first is that Knuckle Duster Vi is insane because they don't show this in her actual hero augment, but she has a percentage chance with her kills to actually drop loot. And it's actually really nice if you can get items and get dropped a bunch of gold. The downside is, well, I mean, Juggernauts is really contested every single game. So it's going to be hard to hit Vi. And it's going to be hard to hit anything besides Vi as well. You might not get to the Mundo 3. The traditional backline that you play for since you're rolling on 6 is Jhin. But you could actually justify playing a lot of backline. If you're not finding Jhin, but you find Vi, you can also play Juggernauts Ashe, right? You can just play the same variation, but just play Vi 3. You can also play Kai'Sa as the backline too, because instead of just playing 6 Juggernaut without Vi, you can play 6 Juggernaut with Vi and play Kai'Sa in the backline. And you don't even have to play AD either. You know, let's say you're in a situation where you hit like, you know, Vi 3 and then you end up hitting Zyra as well. You can get like Zyra Twisted Fate in the backline carry, and boom, all of a sudden you're kind of in this Juggernaut Twisted Fate Zyra situation with Vi 3. So you can definitely like mix and match and cap really high with this. Just don't feel like you have to go for the Jhin 3. Destined Slot Vi is very damage oriented. So Infinity Edge, Hodge are 2 really good items on her. You don't have to have Edge of Night. You can play Stairs Gauge or a handful of other equivalents of it, like even Titans. But just keep in mind that she really wants she wants to hit hard because she's now just a fighter. She's not really a tank. The second hero augment we want to talk about is Garen's Schoolyard Justice. This augment is insane if you're able to get it snowballing, because this Rage Blade on him just has him spam casting the Blade of Justice and getting permanent HP every single time he casts. And that scales with Battle Academia. I've seen this Garen get to 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 bonus health on top of his usual stats. So he just gets to become completely unkillable. And with Yuumi scaling the back line, it just becomes completely ridiculous. So definitely prioritize Schoolyard Justice if you have Rage Blade and Garen. And, you know, the rest of these items, you can justify going, you know, Titans or Quicksilver or Stairs Gauge. You can do like a bunch of different variations, but make sure you have that Rage Blade because it just helps them spam cast this Blade of Justice. Outside of that, though, this is just 7 Battle Academia Prodigy type combination. And you can even play a Bastion version of this. You could actually play like 4 Bastion, 5 Battle Academia, or even some extreme variations. You can play 3 Battle Academia and 6 Bastion. I don't like that version nearly as much because, I mean, you don't scale that much HP because the more potential you have off of Battle Academia, the more HP you get. But I have seen variations of that exist, and they're pretty funny, actually. It feels like no one can win, so you just have Garen casting, like, I'm not even joking, like 15 times in a fight. But you actually don't deal that much damage and you fall off. So I wouldn't recommend the 6 Bastion version late game. And then the last hero augment we'll talk about for this video is Perfect Vorm Zac. And this composition actually has a lot of versatility to it because you don't actually have to play the Kayle Reroll. This is just like one example if you're rolling for Zac 3. But you can also just go straight into, like, let's say you get Protagonist and you get perfect form, you can just push levels and play for Varus. Or you can play 6 heavyweight with some Wraith splash in through like Cassante. You can play Akali, Rise, for example, as well. You don't have to just like stick with this Kayle. And Zac actually does a ton of damage. Zac best in slot is Jewel Gauntlet and Hand of Justice +1. You don't have to have Archangels, but it's just like one thing that's nice to, again, add inevitable scaling. It's no different than like the Rage Blade on the Garen. You just want to like have that scaling throughout the fight because 6 heavyweight itself doesn't inherently help Zac that much because heavyweight converts some HP to AD, and that's not very useful for an AP champ. Zac is also kind of weird. He actually can scale off of attack speed. Like the more attack speed he has, the faster he gains mana. So you actually can have Zac hold Rage Blade. And they have this weird thing where Zac plays like Rage Blade at the beginning of the game. And then like halfway through, you transition to your backline carry. Maybe that Rage Blade goes on Akali instead. So you have some options there. Just something to keep in mind because there is attack speed scaling on Zac that you should be mindful of. If you do end up playing Malphite Hero Augment, you want to play it with the Rage Blade build. Very, very similar to Garen, actually. Except Malphite's not scaling permanent HP. With his Hero Augment, every time he casts, he's going to extend his range for the next cast and go further into the back line. He doesn't actually become the main tank anymore in crew. It's actually Shen, and then you have Malphite be a carry alongside either Ziggs or I guess Janus / Twisted Fate. So just keep that in mind. And you definitely want Rage Blade as his first item being prioritized because that's what helps him scale throughout the fight. And then for Kennen is also a backline marksman now. So you actually want him to have Rage Blade. And we have the build with Jewel Gauntlet and Flail, but you can also go like Archangels and other AP sources. And then you basically just play Protector Akali, but you just have a duo carry with Kennen and have the Akali build that is terrorizing ladder. So just keep that in mind. So there you have it, the 15.2 meta in a nutshell. There are a lot of comps, but just be very mindful that there are going to be some top dogs trying to completely destroy your backline every single game. So yeah, keep that in mind and keep your carry safe as much as possible. Let me know if you guys have any questions about any of these comps or builds in the comments below. We're going to continue to update them. So even by the time this video launches, there's going to be updates to all those like small little builds or power-ups and things like that. So make sure to keep checking every day as we do all those small updates. So that way you guys have all the most relevant information to help you climb. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next video.